Federal income taxes overview. You're in the working world or about to enter the working world. What do you need to know about federal income taxes? Well, let's touch on all the different income taxes imposed by the federal government that you may encounter in your lifetime. First, ordinary income taxes. These are taxes on wages, interest, dividends, business income that are taxed using ordinary income tax rates. There are multiple rates you may be subject to depending on the income earned and your filing status. Let's take a look at the rates for 2022 to give you an understanding. As you can see, you can pay as little as 10% all the way up to 37% of your income, depending on how much money you make. Next up are capital gains taxes. There are two types. Short-term, which are on assets held and sold in less than a year, and they are taxed at your ordinary rates. And then there are long-term, which are on any asset held or sold after a year, and these are taxed at a much more favorable tax rate. Let's take a look at the 2022 long-term capital gains rates to give you an understanding. As you can see from this table, you can either pay 0% or you can pay a maximum of 20%. Obviously, these rates are much more favorable than your ordinary rates. While these rates apply to most assets, there are some that have their own rates, such as art at 28%, or one's primary residence, where the first $250,000 is tax-free unless you're married, and that amount then goes up to $500,000. Clearly, one can see that it's better to have long-term capital gains rates over short-term capital gains rates. Another tax is a net investment income tax. This is an additional 3.8% tax that applies to individuals, estates, and trusts that have net investment income above applicable threshold amounts. In case of an individual, the NIIT is 3.8% on the lesser of the net investment income or the excess of modified adjusted gross income over the following threshold amounts: $250,000 for married filing jointly or qualified widower, $125,000 for married filing separately, and $200,000 in all other cases. In general, net investment income for purposes of this tax includes, but isn't limited to, interest, dividends, certain annuities, royalties, and generally rents. It also applies to income derived in a trade or business, which is a passive activity, or trading in financial instruments or commodities. And then if you have net gains from the disposition of property other than property held in a trade or business to which NIIT doesn't apply. However, there are a few net investment income exclusions. There are tax-exempt state and municipal bond interests, veteran administration benefits, or the gain or sale from the principal residence. The next tax I want to talk with you about is the Social Security tax. This is a 6.2% tax of one's fully taxable wages up to a certain limit. This limit increases each year, and for 2022, the limit was $147,000 of wages. Then you have the Medicare tax. This is an additional 1.45% on one's fully taxable wages, and there is no limit on the wages. And if that wasn't enough, then you have an additional Medicare tax if you make a certain amount of money. This is an additional 0.9% tax on wages over $200,000 and above for people that are single filers, $250,000 and above for married tax filers filing jointly, $125,000 and above for married tax filers filing separately, $200,000 and above for head of household tax filers, and $200,000 above for qualifying widow tax filers with a dependent child. And then, if you own your own business, you will be subject to self-employed taxes if your business goes on Schedule C of your personal tax return. You will pay an additional Social Security tax of 6.2% on the income that qualifies as wages up to the yearly limit, and an additional 1.45% on all business income that also qualifies as wages. Basically, you will pay a total of 12.4% in Social Security taxes and 2.9% in Medicare taxes. Because when you own your own business, you have to pay the other 50% of those taxes that corporations pay on behalf of their employees. And then lastly, you have the federal estate tax, which is not an income tax, but I thought you would point it out to you. If you're fortunate enough to have an estate, you may be subject to this. You may owe up to 40% of the value of your estate that exceeds $12.06 million, which is the 2022 exemption amount. As you can see, there are lots of types of federal income taxes. If you have more questions about these, please talk with a tax professional.